Today we are going to talk about life. Like, what is life? And to do this, we're going to look through a case study about the characteristics of life. And this one, I'm going to tell you where we leave truth behind because there is some fiction in this case study, but we're using this to think about life. So, the first question: do you think life exists elsewhere in the universe besides planet Earth? So, of course, we don't know that for sure. So, here is our case study scenario that we are imagining that we have the president who is under pressure from the public and Congress to find ways to balance the budget. And space exploration is often discussed as a place that we could cut the budget. Um, but the president is aware that there is a risk that if there is life and life shows up in our Earth, then there could be consequences. And I'm not just talking about alien spaceships coming and waging intergalactic war, but even a space microbe could impact our world. I don't know if you've ever read the story Andromeda Strain, but it's a story about an asteroid that comes close enough to Earth. A meteor strikes the Earth, and there is actually a disease carrying microbe on this from space, and it ends up killing people. And I won't tell you the whole story in case you ever want to read it, but that is one of the ideas as well. So this is a possibility, and because of this, as well as many other reasons, that's a reason not to cut funding for the space program. So, here is our task as part of this case study. We are pretending that we are advisors to the president, and we have done a study, and we need to make a recommendation based on this study. We've made a discovery, and we need to see if we think extraterrestrial life has been discovered. So, a little bit of truth. NASA does have a planetary protection policy that's designed to protect planets and moons and asteroids, any of the places that we go. There is a protection policy that helps to protect those places that we're sending our spacecraft from us. So we don't want to contaminate these other places with Earth life. And we also want to protect Earth from any things coming from other places. So when there was the moon landing, for example, and they collected a whole bunch of moon rocks and they brought them back to Earth, there was actually a big fear that there was going to be some disease from the moon that would infect people here on Earth. So there was a whole quarantine process for any of the materials brought back from the moon. So this policy works both ways, and this is a real thing. So, in order to know about life and be able to recognize life coming from other places, we need to know what are the characteristics of life. How will we figure out if there is life somewhere if we ever discover it? So, what are the basic characteristics of life? What makes something alive? I want you to actually take a few minutes and think about what makes something alive. So, based on your ideas, are any of these things alive? So, we've got a lawnmower and a candle and a dead bug in amber and some sort of furnace or HVAC equipment. So I don't quite know what you wrote down for your characteristics of life, but maybe you wrote things like movement or uses energy or something like that. The lawnmower moves. The lawnmower and the candle and the HVAC system all use energy. Maybe you wrote that it breathes. And in some ways, the lawnmower and the candle and the HVA system, they all breathe. Maybe you wrote that it has cells, and that bug has cells, but I think we would agree that it's dead. Like it used to be alive, but it's now dead. So, thinking about these characteristics, maybe you're beginning to see that it's a little bit tricky because some of these things that are not alive do exhibit characteristics of life. Some of these things that we might say. So keep thinking about what are your characteristics of life. But here's another question. Why do space programs like NASA look for evidence of water on Mars? It's a big thing. They have been looking for evidence, and they've actually found evidence of water on Mars, and it made big news. There was some recent news that an asteroid, one of the dwarf planets actually in the asteroid belt, has some evidence that it has a sort of briny water that's liquid under its surface. So that's big news. Why? Is it A, that Martian life requires water? Is it B, the polarity of water is necessary for making DNA? Is it C, Earth life requires water? Or D, the organic molecules can be dissolved in water? So this one actually has a correct answer, that it's that Earth life requires water. We know what Earth life looks like. So all the Earth life that we know of needs water. So in order to recognize other life, it's going to help us out if it also requires water. So if it's a water-based life form. I'm not saying that's the only kind of life that's going to be out there, if there is life out there, but it's probably going to be easier for us to recognize life if it also has water, just because it'll be more familiar. So here's another part of our case study. And this is beginning to get into some fiction. So we have been given a chunk of subterranean ice collected on Mars by one of the rovers. So let me tell you what's fiction and what's not. So we have discovered ice on Mars. That's true. There are rovers on Mars. That is true. They can even collect some little samples of things, but it's only very small samples. So we probably aren't going to get a chunk. It might be a sliver. But then, are these chunks or slivers or any samples coming back to Earth? No. The rovers are the ones doing some basic rudimentary tests, not nearly what our case study is going to talk about. So no material from Mars has come back to Earth. So this part is now fiction. But let's just pretend that we do get to see here a chunk of this ice that has been discovered. So pretend that we have done some scans and the ice has some little bacteria-sized particles, about 100 nanometers, and they contain DNA. How do we know if these are alive? If you had to pick just one thing to do, which one of these would you pick to see if that test could help tell you if these little blobs, these little particles, are alive. Would you A, thaw it and see if they're mobile? Would you thaw it and see if they grow and reproduce? Would you keep it frozen and run some tests just to learn more about their chemical composition? What are these little blobs made of? Would you thaw it and shock them, expose them to an electrical charge, shock them, and look for a response? So if you wanted to figure out, are they alive, and you can only do one thing, which one of these things would you do? So I'm not sure which one you picked, but I'm generous and I tried out several of these. So regardless of which one you picked, we're getting results from a lot of these different tests. So we looked at their chemical composition, we scanned them, and these little blob things are surrounded by something that looks like a cell membrane, except, and I know we haven't learned about cell membranes yet, but this cell membrane isn't made of phospholipids like ours. It's made of something else called calcium phosphate, but it definitely looks similar to a cell membrane. But there are no internal membrane brown structures, like there's not a mitochondria or a nucleus or something like that. But not every earth cell has all of those organelles either. Bacteria do not have those membrane bound structures. All right, so we thawed them, but they didn't move. They're not mobile. There are small amounts of DNA and proteins inside of these little nanoparticles. And they do reproduce, but only in an anoxic environment. Anoxic means no oxygen. So if they were in a no oxygen environment, they were reproducing. But if we gave them antibiotics, they stopped reproducing. So, based on our ideas, any ideas that you have come up with about what makes something alive, would you say that these nanoparticles are alive? So I'm going to hop back really quick and show you those scans again. So do we think that these have enough information to say that they are alive? Remembering that bacteria are alive and even small worms, or we're not talking about full aliens, but are they alive at all? Plants are alive, fungus is alive. So think about that and decide, is there enough evidence? Would you say these are alive? All right, so we're going to look further and we see that there are little virus like particles attached to some of these nanoparticles. Now, I know we definitely haven't talked about viruses, although we're going to. And maybe you've heard quite a bit about viruses with the coronavirus around. But basic idea of what a virus does, a virus attaches to a cell and somehow works its way in. It might get its entire virus self into the cell, or it might just inject its nucleic acid, so it's DNA or RNA, into a cell. Then it convinces that cell to make copies of itself and to make more proteins. And then it assembles itself. A virus is only a protein shell with a DNA or RNA inside. That's all that a virus is. So it convinces the cell to make copies of this, it assembles itself, and then it bursts out of the cell, and then each of those virus particles can go and infect another cell. So we scan these little Mars mystery objects, and these little tiny potential viruses that are stuck to our nanoparticles do contain RNA and proteins. They don't move. They only reproduce when nanoparticles are present, and they don't use any type of food presented to them. So, do you think that the virus objects are alive? And based on all of this, would you say, if all of this had really happened, would you say that extraterrestrial life has been discovered with our little nanoparticles, potentially from Mars? What would you tell the president? And why or why not?